You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Lachlan here for your Murder Mystery World Tour. We are discussing chapters 9 to 15 of Cargo of Eagles by Margery Allingham and completed by her late husband Pip posthumously. I've got Lachlan in here filling in for Herds, who's currently away enjoying a trip with the penguins in Antarctica, or so he tells me. I don't really believe him, Lachlan.
Is he genuinely?
It's one of those things where, like, he said it as a bit to me, but he may have actually done it to commit to the bit that hard.
I'd be so impressed if he did.
I don't know how practical that is at the current state of affairs, but, like, I wouldn't put it past him, you know?
I had a friend that recently got back from an overseas holiday, and the whole time they were trying to confuse everyone about where they were, just geo-tagging wherever they were in different parts of the world. No one can figure it out.
It's kind of exciting, wanting to hear about those adventures when they get back, and you're like, which parts of this are true? And I think that's also the vibe that I have here for Cargo of Eagles, where we've gone off into this small town and it's not entirely clear what we're going to come back away with. There very much is the sense that Saltey is the epicenter of all things in this story, but we've like diversified what parts of Saltey are doing what. You know, we have the farm with the burial mounds, we've got Mob's Bowl, which is like the lowlands of the town, and we're turning it from this like big conglomerate that it was described as previously into a bit more of a diverse, regular place where people live, which is crazy.
There's genuinely so much going on, and I'm trying to keep it all straight in my head, and it's confusing me so much with this prediction that I've got to make. I'm quite stressed.
Yeah. I mean, I love chapter 9 in particular as a way to like pick back up here for this week because, you know, Morty goes in, he's doing this interrogation down at the local pub, The Demon, which we've heard so much about over the past few chapters, only for him to just about get into a fight after a debate involving a sex pot. I could not tell you what that really is, either for acceptable conduct on air reasons or just because I'm confused. I will not disclose the nature of this. But like, God, I love that scene of him just getting like knocked out. It's so tense the way that we build up towards him awakening with his companion standing over him like, what's going on here?
The whole time I was just so stressed reading it. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew something bad was going to come of him following some stranger that we don't really trust into an empty barn. It's not setting up for a very good outcome, but it did make me like it more. I don't know if that was the intention, but reading about all the different people and at least understanding what different parts of the town actually were, I think I've got a soft spot for Saltey. I'll go and visit sometime.
Yeah, it like certainly brings the place to life in a way that I don't think the other chapters have. But I mean, we also haven't really been here as much. The other scene that I really loved coming in here was the scene at Cheffen's farm where we're going over the like mounds, which at the start of the chapter we say like right at the beginning like, oh yeah, those are obviously just garbage mounds that have been like buried underground, but there's the obvious insinuation and the very like haunting atmosphere that perhaps these are actually burial mounds.
I mean, it's just very upsetting to realize how dark this story could get. I mean, Mossy Ling, just as I was starting to like him, the same thing happened with Askew last week. Mossy Ling, really a beautiful old man just trying to scam people out of beer. And then he dies from apparently a ghost, and you know, it's adding to the mystery, it's adding to the confusion, and I really have no idea who it could have been.
I forget though, does he die to a silver bullet?
I don't think we know.
Yeah.
I think we find out he's suspicious that someone is in his house with him, and then the start of the new chapter, he's dead.
It's very curious because I mean that was one of the big things is that like aesthetically that theme of piracy has run through the entire novel, but we haven't like picked it up as strongly here. I felt now that we're getting to learn about the town, the like piratic mysticism, for lack of a better word, has kind of faded away from the town a little bit.
And it sort of is making me feel a bit more sympathy for everything that's going on, at least for the characters that we can't be certain, but we can be quietly confident aren't wrapped up in the evil goings on. Like, what's her name? Dixie Wishart. she's just trying to run her pub, make a bit of money out of the story about a demon, and then she's got all this other stuff going on to deal with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we have characters like Dixie and like Dido who very much feel like, you know, straightforward characters just living their lives in the periphery of this town's mysticism. But then we have like Kitty. I don't actually know how that one's pronounced.
I've been saying Kitey.
Yeah, and who's the other? Is it Jonah? Who's the other? And those two families, how they like owned everything around the town, and this like almost sense of tribalism where it's like who had the most power, and obviously because Kitey, God, I have the inkling feeling I'm getting that wrong at the back of my head, but I have no way to correct myself right now. Yeah, there's this very weird sense of like tribalism in the power struggles between those families, but Kitey is breaking that by lending property to Dido, like breaking the chain of this system that has gone through. And, you know, in the broader context of things, that's likely to be an improvement on the town, getting away from its horrid old roots of gang crime and piracy. But the town isn't quite, I guess, socially ready for that, in a sense.
I mean, it could also be, we found out during the chapters in the hospital early on that Kitey, does she have a first name? The old lady. Old lady Kitey. They just love playing with each other. It feels like giving the property to some stranger nurse could be an extension of that. And I like that they're shaking up the status quo.
I get the feeling at the moment that you're perhaps leaning to the idea that like something in their youth is kind of the motive for the crime there.
I mean, that's one idea. I'm really just very confused, and I do like that about the book. But there could be. I feel like there's something in the past that we don't know, and if I knew, I'd be a lot calmer reading it. But I also am enjoying being stressed.
I think it's a good book for you to be stressed on. Like, this is a murder mystery where, you know, we can get into the actual puzzle later on in the show when we're talking explicitly about the mystery. But I think one thing that's really fun about this book is that it keeps a great sense of tension going and has a lot of the mystery fundamentals in terms of there is a question you need to answer and the question is very obvious, but the truth is not. It's a good book, I think, for me to have dragged someone like yourself on the show, Lachlan, where, you know, I love talking with you about the things that we're both interested in, but I'm definitely throwing you under the bus, and I think it's a very eloquent bus that I've shown to thrown you under here.
It's like the one of the main rules of writing that I know about, that I learned from an author, is at any point in a story, you have to imagine what the reader is going to expect and then do the opposite, and it's exactly what's happening every time I turn the page. Something that I would never have thought to happen just happens, and then all of my theories fall out the window. It's not necessarily specific moments happening, but just every time I think I understand where the story is going, it just shifts just slightly to make me question everything.
Yeah, I mean, then we also have the story about the ship head that's been like stashed away in the barn, which is why we go out to the farm in the first place, which is an interesting one because I feel as though for the rest of the story, there's been this idea of like the separation of land. You know, the Kitey and Woodrose family having this kind of tear between them, the idea that the sea is a free and open space for the pirates to do what they will, and it's only coming to land that they really kind of endanger themselves by approaching the police. But this ship's figurehead almost like symbolically being stashed away where it's like in reach but unknown is a really curious question in terms of like what else is in the town and hidden away.
It's almost like they're teasing the police with like it's just under their nose and they know something's going on, but they can't find it.
Do you have any inkling of an idea of what else that might be pointing at?
I have no clue. This whole story is just confusing me a lot, but I'm really enjoying it, and I can't wait for the next week, if not just to find out where it's going.
Alrighty. Well, I suppose we should wrap this part of the discussion here and head over to the mystery section so I can grill you further. It's been difficult not to ask questions, and I've failed, as I'm sure you've noticed. But it's time for the final grilling as you throw your final theory into the ring. This is Death of the Reader, your Murder Mystery World Tour. Flex here. I'm joined by Lachlan as we discuss Margery Allingham's Cargo of Eagles. And we'll be back with more of that in just a second. Stick around. You're on 2SER 107.3. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here with you. Coming out the 5th of October this year, YA author Kate McCaffrey joins the world of crime fiction with her novel Double Lives, following radio journalist Amy Rhinehart investigating the too simple to be true murder of one Casey Williams and the podcast she creates to do it. Kate, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me, Flex.
I have to say, as a radio host, I felt a certain amount of physical panic at the suggestion of Amy, like the amount of research that Amy has to do week to week to keep the show going rather than everything being neatly prepared.
Yeah, I know. It was a grueling job for her, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think there's something so fun about this idea. We've had so many books coming out recently that deal with this idea of this like emergence of the true crime podcast. We're years into the trend at this point. We've seen the aftermath of many podcasts in the legal world. At this point, what kind of motivated you to make the jump from YA to this podcast world, crime fiction?
I think initially I was really interested in really the gender aspect of the novel. And being a YA writer, normally I would have located that in the schoolyard, and I didn't feel it was appropriate for this topic. So because I am a true crime fan and I love podcasts, it just seemed this intersection of what I wanted to do and doing it that way, and looking at how podcasts, they're now intersecting the justice world. You know, they're appearing in court cases. We've had 2 outstanding results in the last month. Those 2 podcasts were actually really inspirational in my writing of this book.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. Like, there's the detective who comes in, for example, and you have these lines talking about how, you know, he doesn't trust hikers because they always find the bodies, and how they kind of like pre-prepared those things. There's almost this like dressing up sort of a thing that goes on where like it's not this scrappy investigation of people operating on their own anymore. Like, there are big organizations involved in putting these sorts of things together, which you deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we get that, you know, when we're listening to these podcasts, that it's so far beyond just, you know, like that podcaster. You know, Hedley Thomas comes to mind, obviously, and the reach that he has getting all this information. But I think the other really interesting thing about it is getting the listeners involved, and that is like really making big waves, I think, in these cases.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not one thing that's like really interesting about this, is that so much of the drive of getting this story together is kind of the push to beat 44.3 at the damn ratings.
That's right.
And I really like the journey that Amy kind of goes on there, from like that cold clinical thing of just like, oh, well, we just have to come up with something that'll crush our rivals by numbers, to her just being so over-invested in this story. I guess, is there anything that you see about yourself as an author in the way that like maybe you think too much about the numbers when you're putting books out?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think that I'm only ever successful when what I've written is a genuine true from me, as opposed to looking at trying to make a commercial success, because anything that I've deliberately set out to try and hit a market with still remains unpublished.
I suppose the other fun thing that you have going on here is that in the vein of metafiction, but perhaps not as explicitly so, this kind of fits into the growing world of media fiction.
Yes.
And stories about other types of media. I think like Amy Suter Clark's Girl 11 kind of tells a similar podcast, telling a story within a story, but not in that like witticism, breaking the fourth wall sense that you'd normally get in like a traditional metafiction.
The story within the story, the frame narrative, it's so appealing. I liked being able to harness this, even though it's not really a new genre in terms of podcasts, but yeah, tying it into the fiction novel. I like that kind of blending of genre. And I mean, to me, my favourite frame narrative story within a story would have to be Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. And I mean, I used to teach that book when I was a high school teacher, and the kids would go, well, I don't really get it. And I was like, did you read the end? Oh, well, that's the reveal. It creates a really layered narrative. And I guess with Double Lives, I was able to explore Amy's personal life through the podcast, but how the podcast impacted on her external life outside of the podcast. So that crossing over was really interesting.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's kind of fun about it is that because the story within a story here is the kind of transcript of the podcast, there's a very different style that you had to write in. How was it transitioning into basically writing a script rather than a manuscript, to use the briefest terms I possibly can?
Yeah, that's right. It was surprisingly easy to do. And I think probably because I listened to it all the time. So knowing that, this was going to be, the sort of like you've got the sound of the guard coming in and, the recordings that they're doing and the muffled noises and all of that. Because it's such, you listen to this, it's so an audible thing that for me, it was quite easy to turn it into the sound of a podcast. Yeah,
I guess the next thing that I wanted to get into is I've been dodging all of these issues about like the personalities within this novel because, Casey, the kind of lead victim being trans, is like a huge part of this book, as well as the historical case that kind of originally leads Amy to find this similar modern case.
Yeah.
I guess the thing I wanted to ask there is about that like historical parallel and the way that we see transgender issues as this very modern thing that we're dealing with, but right at the opening of the book, you're like, no, 1917, my friend.
Oh my God, that was so amazing, that story. I mean, I guess if I go back to being a high school teacher and the transgender issues were becoming so prevalent in the schoolyard, what I noticed was the kids were so tolerant and accepting, and that was just, this is the way it is. And it was the older generation who was struggling. It was more that they were struggling with how transgender people impacted their own identity, which I thought, this is so strange. And it was this whole modern concept. And when I started to research into it, and I found that Eugenia Fellini, Harry Crawford case, which is true. It's a true story. It was like, wow, you can't couch this as sort of like modernism. This goes back, and that makes it such an interesting concept to explore that, we've just been not dealing with it for all these years. And I wanted to use that because I felt it really put into perspective the fact that this isn't just something that's happened in the last however many years. This has been around forever.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing on that front is, of course, the idea of double lives, because the insinuation is, of course, that when we open a book called Double Lives with a story about a transgender person, that like, oh, it's the transgender person leading two lives, whereas the kind of irony to me that I felt in the opening chapters of the novel was that it seems explicitly the opposite, that Casey Williams is perhaps the only person in this story telling the damn truth.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And again, because she is the victim of a hideous crime, she is the silent one. And I think that comes across all the time when you're listening to these podcasts and, there's been a murder and often it's a woman and, you never hear their voice and you never hear from them. And yet in this telling of these tales, I mean, Jonah's living the double life. Amy's living the double life. There's so many people living the double life except for Casey.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I wanted to ask about is that this week on the show we're talking about Cargo of Eagles by Margery Allingham, completed posthumously by her husband, Philip Youngman Carter. And it's this story that deals with this small town in Essex that has this long history of piracy, and it's never really escaped that kind of grasp in the same way that I see in your story, Jonah, like not really escaping the holds of his family and the church tradition that he grew up in. What did you feel you discovered in writing Jonah about like escaping kind of the sins of the father type model? Like, can people really break out of that mold, or is there always just a bit of it left in them?
Jonah has probably got trappings of both my mother and my father, and they're both dead. And my mum only died last year. My dad nearly 11 years ago. But both of them, my dad was a lapsed Roman Catholic. He was training to be a Marist brother and he ran away. And my mum was a lapsed Jehovah's Witness, lapsed Church of England, lapsed Mormon, lapsed...
Collect them all.
She was lapsed in everything. At the end of her life, she was part of a sort of like a flower essence cult. And at the end of her life, she was a Buddhist. So I kind of saw that, both of my parents were highly intelligent people, but this thing, they couldn't shake it. I mean, I call it the God gene, and I clearly don't have it, but they both, there was just something in that. And I think that's what Jonah has, he had, had that, and trying to escape from that, I think he doesn't really escape from it. He changes it, but he doesn't really escape from it. And I just find the whole concept of cults and that kind of whole just like supremely interesting.
Alrighty. Well, Kate, thank you so much for joining us here on Death of the Reader. It's been an absolute pleasure reading through and talking about Double Lives.
Thanks, Flex. I really appreciate it.
We will have links up on the podcast for where you can find a little bit more about Double Lives. And thank you to Echo Publishing and DMCPR for getting me a copy of the book ahead of the release. We are talking Margery Allingham's Cargo of Eagles. Stick around, more to come. You're listening to Death of the Reader, Flex, and not Hertz, Lachlan, for your Murder Mystery World Tour. We are discussing Cargo of Eagles by Margery Allingham, chapters 9 to 15. It is the second week, which if you listen regularly, you will know means it is time for Lachlan to pose a solution. Now, I have a few things that I'm going to offer you out the gate as avenues for points, but these aren't the only avenues. First of all, we have 2 people dead. I need to know who killed them. I need to know why. Each of those is worth a point, each of those people.
Okay.
Second of all, I need to know what has happened to Teague and Co. and the goods that they stashed away. And finally, I would love to know what the Cargo of Eagles is.
Oh my God. It never even occurred to me that it could be a real thing. I thought it was just a name. Well, in my head, this entire time, I've been assuming that either Teague or Target have been the ones doing the murders.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'm confident enough to say it on the record. I've noticed Campion always seems to be just away from the action. The thing that I'm thinking of specifically is like in one of the most recent chapters, there was the big fire. There was all the breaking in going on. He wasn't there. He was just off watching some group of people or something.
Yeah.
Whatever. Where was Campion?
Where was Campion?
I think he literally said he was going off to watch a fight, or he was going off to like keep eye on something.
Yeah.
Which is suspicious upon reflection.
It definitely is. You're making it sound to me like Campion is working for the enemy almost. Is that where you're going, or is it kind of just that he's pulling strings behind the scenes that are going to amass a big showdown at the end?
I don't think he's working for them. I think he has some connection with Teague and Target, and he's being, I don't know, he's not being misled. He's misleading other people. As for, what was the second question? I didn't even answer the first one.
No, you haven't. You haven't answered a single question really yet.
I'm just going to say, I think Teague has killed the 2 people. Purely because it makes more sense in my head that he has than he hasn't.
Okay. Why has he killed the 2 people?
Because he is evil.
Okay.
I don't know. No, because he has something. They're hiding something.
What are they hiding?
Are you seeing me figure this out in real time?
No, listen. This is my favorite type of sport. I love being in your position right now on the show and trying to get this by the skin of my teeth. If Teague killed them, why would he put himself in the line of fire and murder someone additional to the many people that he's wronged in the past if they weren't in his way in somehow? And if so, how were they in his way?
One thing that I've just thought of, maybe they're distractions. Maybe he's trying to smuggle things out, whatever he has stashed away.
Yeah.
There's something stashed away. We know that.
Is it the Cargo of Eagles?
Yes. That's my answer.
All right, what is in the cargo? What is the Eagles?
I can't just say drugs. I don't know. Well, should we start with what is a cargo?
I mean, if you want, sure.
Do you have an answer for me?
Do you trust my answer?
Oh, I've got no better alternative. What, like a box?
Makes sense to me. That does tend to be the form that cargo comes in.
All right. Or, okay, hold on, new theory. the boat, the ship.
Yes.
That could be the cargo. And he's got things stashed in there. But there's something hidden. That's why people are breaking into all these places. Maybe it is something integral to the ship, not keys, because you don't need them for a boat.
Interesting.
I'll come back to that.
All right.
Teague killed them, though, because he thought they had whatever he's looking for. That's my answer, and I'm confident I'm wrong.
I'm very interested. I'm going to throw you a bone here. But it's on the grounds that you understand that there is one point you are sacrificing in accepting this bone.
I'm sure Herds will be okay with that.
An eagle is the name for a gold coin.
Wow, we all knew that. You didn't need to share that, but that does make things interesting. Okay, so there's money. There's money hidden away. They want to get the money. Teague and Target, who are...
It's pirate gold. That's why I hadn't given it to you earlier.
They're looking for their booty.
They're looking for pirate gold.
Okay.
The pirate town.
This is all making a lot more sense now. They maybe thought that Mossy Ling or Hector Askew knew where it was, but they wouldn't say. And then Jonah Woodrow's, who was kidnapped or something, we don't know what.
I mean, as we've covered, his family had pretty, strong ties to the land, which means they probably know a lot more about the land than a lot of other people around here.
They did. And he was at least threatened.
Yeah.
So he must have told them. That's my theory.
Okay.
And now, in the next few chapters that we're going to read, it's all going to come out. They're going to catch the money. That's not a good way of phrasing it, but that's what I'm saying.
I think this is all making sense.
You have to respect. This is the first murder mystery book I've ever read.
In getting someone in to fill in for Herds, I've really, as I said, thrown you under a very nice bus. I figured that it would be fun for the audience to come and see, what a mortal can do with a murder mystery. Because Herds and I have become gods. And I do not say that out of a place of egocentrism or even necessarily believing in my own ability, but, I do have to remember at some points, as bringing yourself in here, that these murder mystery books can be pretty difficult if you don't sit down with a pen and paper and make 4,000 words of notes for every book that you read.
I mean, I have been taking notes.
You've made admirable notes. I have access to Lachlan's notes here, and they've been very useful in guiding through these episodes. Though, don't get me wrong, but yeah, there's a lot of things that I think you've caught on to on the surface. But I'm going to have to deliberate long and hard about how many points I'm going to give you here.
I'd be okay with none.
I mean, that is advantageous for me. I don't have Herds here arguing his own case, so maybe I should just give you none.
If only he wasn't with the Penguins right now.
If only he wasn't with the Penguins right now. But nonetheless, Lachlan, I very much appreciate you taking the time to pose your theory here, and we'll kind of come back and debrief on how you've done. I think that for a first swing, you've done an excellent job at least having a crack at it. Because, I mean, what kind of idiot comes up to a microphone in front of however many people and says, here's what I think about this murder mystery? Fools. Fools.
Thank you so much. I really like the caveat of saying an excellent crack at it.
Listen, I don't want to promise anything in advance. I have to sit down and deliberate.
Yeah. I understand.
Either way, this is your Murder Mystery World Tour here on 2SER 107.3. Flex here. I'm joined by Lachlan, one of our sprightly producers behind the scenes on the show. And I hope that you are enjoying Cargo of Eagles by Margery Allingham. Thank you, Past Flex. I am. Next week on the show, it is Radiothon, 2SER's annual festival fundraiser that helps keep community on air here in Sydney. That means that the show will be off for a couple of weeks. Shout out to Kenneth Branner for accidentally misconspiring with us to be offset by a week when we thought this was going to line up. But anyway, there still will be a couple of interviews going up on the podcast, including a fun chat with Jamie West, going the full way through his book, Death on the Pier. Full spoilers there. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be back with Cargo of Eagles in a few weeks' time, all the way to the end. So you got a good bit of time to catch up on your reading if you've fallen behind. Nonetheless, we hope you can join us for the Radiothons. Herds and I will be in the studio having a good, fun time celebrating all things 2SER with the theme, We Are Family. This is your Murder Mystery World Tour here on 2SER 107.3, and we'll see you then.